Welcome, everyone. We're here tonight to listen to a conversation between Farah Ali, author of People Want to Live, and Phuc Tran, author of the memoir Saigon. I'm going to dive right into intros in a second so we can get right to our conversation. But before that, I just have a few orders of business. First off, thank you to Print Bookstore for being our book selling partner for this event. Once we get started, I'll put links into the chat box for where you can go directly to order either Farah's collection, People Want to Live, or Phuc's memoir. We'll go for about 40 minutes, just back and forth between Farah and Phuc, and then we'll have some audience questions. And if you guys want to put your questions in the chat box at any time, that would be great. Finally, we'd like to acknowledge that in Portland, Maine, where we're located, in Brunswick, where I am, and throughout Maine, we are inhabiting the homeland of the Wabanaki people of the Dawn, who are still here living, creating, and caring for this land and water. I'm so excited to have Farah zooming into Maine tonight from Dubai to be with us to talk more about her unique, compelling, and entirely wonderful collection, People Want to Live, which came out last month from McSweeney's. And I'm also so glad that Phuc agreed to be part of this conversation as well. Really looking forward to it. I first met Farah in the Tin House Summer Workshops in Portland, Oregon. We were in the same workshop, and I love the story Farah submitted, Beautiful, which is also part of this collection. Also, Farah and I were on the same floor of the same dorm room, and we had the same teeth brushing schedule, which was also awesome because I knew by that point, having read Farah's story before workshop and just getting a sense of her in workshop, that I was a huge fan of her as a person and her writing as well. One of the things that's so cool about being part of a writing community is that we meet people and get to know them better on the page and through their words and imaginations. And I really, both then and now, loved and love Farah's sensibilities and frankness on the page. I admire her sly sense of humor in her stories and the way she pays really careful attention to her characters that are on the edge, many of them struggling with mental health issues or with grief or just with various very real stresses. And I love the way she refuses to be sentimental with her subjects, even as the way that she handles them evokes such a powerful response in the reader. So quickly, I'm going to read Farah and Phuc's bios, and then I'll hand it over to Phuc. Farah Ali is from Pakistan. Her work has been anthologized in the 2020 Pushcart Prize, as well as received special mention in the 2018 Pushcart Anthology. Her stories have appeared in Shenandoah, the Arkansas International, the Southern Review, Kenyon Review Online, Copper Nickel, Ecotone, the Colorado Review, and elsewhere. People Want to Live is her first collection. Phuc Tran has been a high school Latin teacher for more than 20 years, while also simultaneously establishing himself as a highly sought after tattooer in the Northeast. His 2012 TED Talk, Grammar, Identity, and the Dark Side of the Subjunctive was featured on NPR's TED Radio Hour. His acclaimed memoir, Saigon, a misfits memoir of great books, punk rock, and the fight to fit in, received the 2020 New England Book Award in nonfiction. So we're in for a great conversation between these two. Thank you both. Take it over.
Thanks so much, Taryn. So I think we'll start off with Farah reading a little bit, and then I'll start grilling her. All right, so Farah, take it away, please. And then
thank you, Taryn, for that introduction and the teeth brushing. Yeah, we had clean teeth, and thank you, Phuc, for doing this. So I'm going to read from a story called An Act of Charity. After an hour in the tunnel, Shahid's legs started to cramp. He had been in a crouch the whole time, worried about getting his pants dirty by sitting on the layer of rubbish there. He reached out a hand slowly, and even more slowly, he brought his fingers down. He was afraid of feeling something damp, something soft, but it was dryness that he touched. Paper or leaves, maybe. He shifted until his body was above his hand, and lowered himself onto whatever it was that was not rotting wetly. He straightened his legs, and in the relief of the blood flowing, he sucked in his breath, and the smell of dirty water from the open sewer made him choke. A breeze started to blow into the tunnel, and he took off his shoes and socks and wiggled his toes in the air. A few more minutes went by, and then, overcome with tiredness, lulled by the breeze, he lay down completely, his head on his shoes. It was a little after midnight. From the road outside, the sound of the traffic had gone away. Only the odd car whisper rushed or a truck sped by noisily. It was peaceful. He closed his eyes and slept. When he awoke, the day had begun. He crawled out of the tunnel, went home, showered, and went to work. A few weeks after this, he went with Mira to a party. The two of them had gotten engaged 6 months ago, when everything in Shahid's world seemed to be happening on schedule, when he could explain the restlessness inside him as just extra unchallenged energy, so he had taken up running, then a new language, then the possibility of a different job. Mira sometimes laughed and said as long as he didn't take up an expensive hobby, he could do whatever he liked. They had become best friends in college, and their engagement had been inevitable. She laughed at something he said as they walked up to their friend's house. He had not told her about the tunnel. The party was their friends Rafi and Sarah's 1-year wedding anniversary celebration. By the time Shahid and Mira arrived, dinner had been laid out. The guests were allowed to respond to their respective hungers and go to the dining area as they pleased. For almost 2 hours, the serving dishes were refilled as needed by the staff. In this crowd of people who had graduated only a few years ago, in these rooms full of comfortable pieces of furniture, under the flood of words from friends and acquaintances, everyone's faces lit up by soft yellow lights, Shahid felt warm and happy and calmer than he had in a while. He felt connected to all of these people's dreams and hopes and ambitions. Thank you. I'm going to stop there.
And can I just say, that was not that I really picked favorite stories from your collection, but that was one of my favorite stories. So I can't even tell you guys how crazy that story gets, but it gets real crazy. Farah, thanks so much. And if we have time, I always feel like it's like for me, it's always like this mark of a book that I'm excited about when I am like, when you read a sentence, you're like, I wish I had written that sentence. And there are a few of those in here. So maybe later I'll have you read the sentence that I read. And I was like, God damn, I wish I'd written that sentence, but it was so good. It won't spoil anything for anybody, but it's a humdinger. So anyway, I would love to talk. We'll start off easy. And I feel like, one of the things that I loved about reading the short story collection, one is that at the end of every short story, I wished that it was just going to be a novel. Like I think every character, all the characters are so drawn and their interiority is so rich. But I'm really curious. What I really love is the way that you blur the line between your character surviving and thriving. that there's like this kind of strange, like, oh, this person is in like kind of a bad situation. You're like, oh no, actually they're doing pretty well, or vice versa. And so I'd love to know if that was intentional, and if you have more to say about that, that blurriness between your characters surviving and thriving.
I think maybe it comes from, sorry, and I just got a thing that said my internet connection is unstable. So if I freeze at an awkward pose, it's just because of that. I think when I start writing about from the character's angle, I'm not thinking about them as poor, sad victims somehow. And maybe that's because they don't think of themselves as victims. So the way they go about processing things in their life is, with a slight sense of oblivion to, we are this close to the edge, or any minute now things could fall apart even worse than they are currently. They just kind of go on forwards, making plans and relationships or traveling or whatever. Not because they're optimistic, just because maybe they're stubborn, a bit bullheaded. So maybe that's what creates that. I didn't think about that as before, by the way, like that, what you said, the blur between their desperate situations, but they keep continuing. Yeah, I think it just comes from them not knowing that they could end themselves, or their lives could end at any moment.
And it feels like a false binary sometimes, right? Like I think about the idea of resiliency, right? Like and the idea of people talking about resiliency and grit, and like that bar seems very low, right? Like it's like, wow, you really bounced back from that and now you're still alive. Right.
It's such a hateful line. It's super simplistic.
For sure. And that it's on this like spectrum, right, rather than it's just like one thing or the other.
Exactly.
And then I would love to know about whether the collection started out with this sort of the common thread of sort of Karachi in the background. I read an interview with you where you said that Karachi was an assault on the senses. Am I wrong that you said that? Maybe you did say that. And I read that. I think like in between stories, I went and read an interview and you said that Karachi was an assault. I've never been to Karachi, and I was like, wow. And so with that little nugget in the, sort of still in my brain, I was really struck by how Karachi is this really kind of just like a very quiet backdrop in your character stories. And so I'm curious about, was your intent always to set all the stories in Karachi, or did that sort of start happening or taking shape sort of like midway through the collection? Or I'm so curious about that process.
Yeah, so it is an assault on the senses because every place has an effect on the people, the people who grew up there. But Karachi is like almost 15 million people. It's the southernmost city in Pakistan, and it's where everyone migrates to. Most of the people in Pakistan, they get there. It's a port city. It's got so many of those names. It's like a mega metropolis. It's a beta global city. It's bananas. So, growing up there, it's you're always among people physically. There's no separation between being in a quiet suburb, or there's always people all the time. So there's all these impressions that I had in my head. And as someone, I was telling a friend that the logical side of my brain is just like maybe this big, and the feeling and emotional side is so much bigger. So I was taking in all these observations my whole life. And so when I started writing the Karachi aspect, it's so good that you noticed or felt that it was quiet, because it was not intentional that I'm going to represent my city. No, it was always in my head. So it's there, but as like a humming in the background, almost, not as an obvious thing. So yeah, it's there in like maybe a memory I have of a building that I'd seen somewhere, or the sea, or specific features like that. But it was inevitable.
And I appreciate that you weren't pandering to me, the reader, in the sense that you were trying to sort of like tell me about Karachi. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think, like I felt like you were very much centered in the writing, or at least like it felt like I was looking things up. I was like, oh, I don't know what that is. Like, I guess I'll look that up. And like, I don't know what that is. I'll look that up. And it wasn't.
What did you look up?
Oh, it's mostly like articles of clothing.
Okay,
yeah. And then I went down this rabbit hole about reading about Kismet and like Kismet in English, and which I just thought was like super cool. Just for sure. And I just was like, oh, I've never seen it spelled that way. What is this? And then anyway, but it was like mostly, I think it was just mostly like articles of clothing or food. But I really loved that. I would love to know about your audience. Like I felt like your book, more than most, like I think you're really centered in this audience of one, right? E.B. White's sort of like dictum about writing for yourself first and foremost. So I felt like you didn't, in the best way, like I didn't feel like you were sort of pandering to me, or like trying to explain to me, or felt like you had to represent more than what you wanted to write. So I'm curious about like your thoughts about who your audience is, or did you have a sense of who your sort of idealized reader was when you were writing these stories?
Yeah, such a good question. I think when I told myself I'm gonna start writing now, capital W writing, it was just for myself primarily because there were all these sounds in the head, and I was like, I'm gonna get them out on paper now. So I wasn't thinking about who's gonna be reading them. It's probably not always a great approach, maybe, but because I
Oh, it's
stopped
the best
myself from
approach.
writing for
It's the best approach.
right. I think so, because if you start looking at it from an outsider's lens all the time, it's such a stifling process. So when I finally allowed myself to go, and I'm gonna write seriously now, then there was so many pent up thoughts. It just all came out the way I wanted them to come out, all the anger, all the angst, or whatever. So it was just for myself primarily.
It's amazing. Are there versions of these stories, or have you thought about writing or translating them in Urdu, or is that a thing for you? Like, or is your creative writing really happening in English? I'm so curious about that.
Yeah, it's when I was growing up, I was reading everything in Urdu and English. But mostly the stuff that was available to us in Urdu was very moralistic. Like it came in these little kids journals or kids magazines, and there was always like a finger wagging moral at the end, make your bed or don't piss off your parents or whatever. So and the literature available to our schools generally is that of
Wait, I'm sorry. Don't piss off your parents. That's like a moral. Wait,
not in those words.
Yeah. I would love to read I want to read your translations of those stories if they're available in English, please. Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. So, yeah.
So all the books available to schools' libraries were, Dickens. What do you have? Thomas Hardy, Jane Austen, Ben-Hur. So growing up reading all those things, there was just more available, more variety in the English language. So at some point I just diverged. And then I think when Pakistan started airing some American shows, then I was like, okay, goodbye. There's so much more interesting content coming from the other part of the world back then. But so I think, I've always written in English, always. The translating thing, I look at my native tongue Urdu as something. I mean, I write in it, like a grocery list or something, or I try to teach it to my kids, but translating into that language seems like a monumental task. I don't think I could do Urdu justice, so I'm scared. Maybe I'll go back and do some education in my own language first again, and then attempt.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, there were so many, there were so many parts of when I was reading it, not every short story, but there were certain short stories I was like, oh, I wonder what this would be like in Urdu for like an Urdu reader. Like if this were translated, would it elicit the same feelings for me, or if there were like cultural touch points that I was missing? Anyway, it's sort of like a rabbit hole that we could go down, but I just thought it was really just fascinating. And again, like, I think I really loved that you centered yourself really as like the audience for your own stories, which it felt really authentic to me, and just felt very singular, and it was incredible. I can't rave enough about it, how much I enjoyed it.
That's so kind.
It's really great. Yeah. I would love to know if you have a feeling, this is such a grand question, where, I mean, you have a book out there now, and you are a writer, capital WR, as you say. So where do you see yourself in the continuum now? So like on your bookshelf, or on Taryn's, let's put Taryn on the spot. On Taryn's bookshelf, where does your book get shelved in terms of style and content and worldview? Like, and those could be three different things, or, like if you went over to Taryn's house and you're like, Taryn, I can't believe that you put people want to, you're like, Taryn, this does not belong here, this goes here. Where would you put your book on her shelf? next to
You
next to
know,
who?
I alphabetize my books. I'm very boring. I have such a simple shelving system. So Taryn, if you're not doing that, I'm gonna fix your bookshelves, and I see it.
Wait, did
I'm
you
gonna
say
put all the A's
alphabetical?
together. Uh-huh.
Okay, so yeah, all right.
There's, I know, it's such a boring way, but there's like fiction, alphabetical, and there's like poetry. But my head goes into a spin when there's like, oh my God, this person written fiction and essays. Where the hell do they go now? So,
Yeah.
but
Okay, so
it's just,
yeah,
I
no, no,
just
go
see it
ahead.
as like a collection of short stories, you know. It's a drink coaster.
So there's like elements of like I'm like I think yeah, I think like act of charity was one, but I mean there were a couple of stories where I was like, this was like it felt very like kind of Raymond Carvery in a way. Like if and I know some writers like really hate it when you were like, oh, it really reminded me of blah blah blah. So I don't mean that if you're a writer who hates that, but
I
I
don't hate
really
those things. It's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, it was really I loved it. This is so good. So I would love to I guess I would love to hear some more. Can you talk a little bit about the process and the origin of the writing, like where the short stories began? Um, and if you were ever tempted to just take one and just like spin it off into a novel, or were you sort of disciplined in being like, okay, the story's done now, I'm gonna keep working on the next short story. So like I guess like origin and then process.
Yeah, so they all have generally different origins. Mostly it's just from like an idea of a character in my head. Hardly ever is it about plot. That always seems to come later, if ever there is any plot in my story. Generally, it's about a person and their feelings and what caused those feelings. And I like exploring as much as I can the why behind the why. You know, if he's a mean person, for example, then what caused him or her to be this way? What were the circumstances? And then kind of the picture develops around them. Oh, these were the people they're living with, and this is how they eat, or this is where they go to work, or this is the kind of family they have. And so it generally comes from a thought. Only maybe a couple of stories have been extremely, like, I can tell what happened and what led them to be the way they are. And yeah, the process is, as any writing process goes, there's like the beginning feels like pushing a boulder uphill. It's so hard to get the voice right from what's in your head to how it looks on the page. And then there's a moment of things going really well, and I think I can finish the story in XYZ time, but oh my God, then you hit a wall of writing and there's more hair pulling. I have never wanted to turn any of these into a novel somehow. But
Really?
very, very early on, yeah, never. I had an agent reach out to me many years ago saying, oh, this short story, something, is this part of a novel? And for a moment, I was like, someone's reached out to me. It's so rare. Maybe I should turn it into a novel. And I looked at it and I just couldn't. And maybe, it's a also thing about time and a place. Maybe 10 years later, I'll be like, oh, yeah, okay, I want to write more about that. But
Yeah,
back then, or even now, I'm like,
yeah,
no, this is where they stop.
and I want to say like it's also just for the people who are in the audience who haven't read it, is like what the other thing that I think is such a feat is um the change in perspectives and tone. And there's one story that's like from the perspective of an American at a consulate, like interviewing a couple, and like I was like, this is amazing, like it was just really like, so I think like that, it felt like listening to a record where like a great record where there's like a band and they're sort of like writing songs in different modes. And it was really, yeah, so I just thought, I just want to, that's not a question, that was just like a good job. Really,
Here's your sticker.
yeah, high fives. Like when I remember I got not a lot, but I got definitely a few notes about like cultural things, both like Vietnamese and also like Pennsylvania things, where like my editor was like, could you like unpack this? Like this isn't going to be particularly obvious to readers. which is really funny about the Pennsylvania thing, right? like apparently I'm now speaking for all Pennsylvanians for a hot minute there. But I'm curious if you got notes about that at all, or it didn't seem like it, where like there was like, sort of like this editorial note to expand or unpack or explain for non, Pakistani readers.
Yeah, I think I might have gotten some notes. I think where I didn't generally get notes on the content so much, funnily enough, because we grew up learning British English. But again, at some point I dropped the U's in my spelling. So color is COLOR for me. However, I keep some of the writing ways of British, like thou shalt go. I mean, I don't say thou, but the shall comes in a lot. And I'm told a lot, no, we will drop the shall and put will, because Americans say will. I'm like, okay, to me, it's all the same. But those are generally the editorial notes I get. Sometimes I have received stuff about maybe like, so this goes back to what you said earlier, the translating thing, the dialogue, the language. So I try to keep it, so when it comes to them cussing or swearing, for example, to put F words, it feels not genuine unless it's a specific kind of person, who has gone to a specific school, etc. But, and to translate that kind of vernacular, that felt not true to how the people would actually be speaking. So I kept the dialogue simple in that case. I didn't give me room to fumble with language there. But maybe at one point I might have been asked to make the names easier somehow. And my reaction internally might have been, but I read Russian, whatever, and it translated into English, and they have like very long names, and we got used to that. So
Yeah.
Generally, I've not received cultural specific. I think maybe because I keep it kind of somehow away from that unintentionally. I don't know.
It's very interior. Also, just, I mean, not that I was keeping track of, but you only use the F word once, and it's for like sort of like a low cast of like a cast CASTE, like low class characters, and it's in the end. I was like, well, no, I think like at some point I was like, oh, there's dialogue, and it's like, from all these different people, and it just felt like very restrained, and then there was like an F-bomb at the end. I was like, oh, there it is. All right. Were you tempted at all to, there's like there's an interiority and a complexity within your characters, and what I really thought at some point there would be like sort of like maybe like 3/4 of the way through the collection, I was like, oh, like I wonder if she's gonna like do like the post-colonial like sort of conversation, or like touch upon that, or reflect upon that, and I, as like not in a heavy-handed way, and maybe not even in a light-handed way. Like I don't feel like like your stories are really character-driven. So I'm curious if in your brain you were ever like, oh, I think I'm gonna talk about like being like a British colony, or like post-colonial whatever, as or if that was just not interesting to you.
I think to me it is interesting to me, but in the language, because back home, Pakistan, which is where I'm from, right, the ability to speak English is looked upon as, here's your golden sticker to, or golden ticket to whatever, to jobs, and it's generally looked upon as, it's a stupid, strange way of conflating character goodness with success with language, and language being English. Oh, and it's so prevalent even now. So for me, that matters a lot in that way. And I think and there's a story there called Bulletproof Bus, when he goes for a job and he wants to sound like he can speak really good English, for example. And it sounds weird because I write in English. I think in English, generally. So at some point I struggle sometimes with feeling guilty that I'm not true enough to my mother tongue. But then again, if I start writing in that, I know I will be very stiff. I don't have the fluency in it anymore. I never developed it, short of writing school essays in Urdu, but that was so many years ago. So I don't know how to separate how and why I write in this language with my feelings for English. It's a mixture of feelings, but I do see it. For example, when I go back home, and I see all these little kids and family and stuff, all the talking generally is English. And I tell them to talk, and I try to speak to them in Urdu, but they respond in English. And it's just because of the schools. It's become worse now somehow. It's like we never broke away from it. We have entrenched further into it. And now it's not just British English, it's Americanisms, it's American ways of lifestyles as well. It's way beyond post-colonial now. It's gone into empire.
Yeah, right. Post-imperial, right? No,
yeah,
right.
English as the empire.
Yeah, right. It's amazing. So Taryn, I think I'm gonna do, so I think I'd love to do the speed round. Can you give me a thumbs up? Taryn says thumbs up. So this is just a fun way I'm gonna do a speed round, Farah. Don't overthink this. I'm just gonna ask you to pick, there's 5 things. You just pick them, right? Don't think about them. And then maybe we can open up questions to the audience. So are you ready, Farah?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll start off easy and then we'll get weird, okay? So
it's only 5, man.
Only 5, right? Okay, you ready? All right. Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Dance party or karaoke party?
Oh God. Karaoke.
Poetry or prose?
Oh, that's hard. Prose.
Okay, Gibson's gonna log off immediately right now. Salty or sweet?
Sweet.
Writing or revising?
Writing.
Interesting. I really love revising. Like I could revise all day long. It's like, just give me the thing. I love that. Awesome. Well, thanks. You survived.
Yeah, there was no pixies there though. So
yeah, I thought it was. Do you want to do this? Do we want to talk about the pixies? Yeah, we can talk really shortly. So I was looking at Farah's Instagram, and she sort of like kept putting little pictures of her playlist, and it was the Pixies. So I would love to know about your love of the Pixies, and then we can talk about my love of the Pixies.
I was just putting those. Yeah, go ahead.
No. You go first.
When you told in an email exchange the things you're gonna maybe bring up, I was like, oh, he's gone through the Instagram, hasn't he? And I'm rubbish at my Instagram. It's got maybe like 5 posts, so it's not a lot to go through. But yeah, no, at this point, I was just when I was traveling around a bunch and processing a lot of feelings. So just like getting into those albums, Doolittle, and what was the other one? Surfer Rosa. It was just a good valve for the brain.
Yeah,
all his yelling, so it was good.
Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah, he's amazing. I mean, we saw them on their reunion tour, and Frank Black,
so lucky.
Their live is, his scream is like the other instrument in the band, and like live, it's like legitimately, you're just like, holy smokes, that comes from this like primal play. It's really like amazing. I was not expecting it. I'm curious if you listen to their newer stuff, like any of their newer stuff since they've reformed.
Yeah, like what, Indie Cindy? And...
Beneath the Eerie and stuff. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, it's
okay. I'm sorry, MWPA. Like, we're just gonna talk music for a minute here. Like, what is your? I'm curious. I want to know what your take is, because it sounds like you also like sort of grew up and love like the classic like sort of Pixies, right? Like when they were on 4AD, and then now that they've reformed, like, do you feel like they're just like doing like this like cover band version of what they think their fans want to hear? Or what's your take on that? I want your hot take.
It takes a while to get into their, I mean, it sounds so cliched or simplistic, but it felt like they had no layers before. They were just doing their it sounded more raw somehow. It sounded a touch smoother now, but I think you have to go deeper into their newer albums to dig out some tracks that are still kind of reminiscent of their older stuff, but it takes a while. I didn't love all the stuff in there.
The new stuff, you mean?
Things.
Yeah. And I feel like their earlier stuff, they just weren't afraid to be weird. Like they just sort of,
Exactly.
like there was a joy to their playing, and now with their later stuff, like it feels a little bit like a paycheck a little bit. So it's like now we have to
Yeah.
sound like the Pixies and give the fans what they want, right?
Gosh, yes.
Not to be cynical, I mean, like, we all have mortgages to pay.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. All right, let Tara, you want to take over?
Yeah, no, that was awesome though. I love when conversations just kind of take their own path to a different place. But this is a good question too, because I have a sense a little bit of Farah's answer to this, but I think it's one of the really interesting parts about her as a writer. So Gibson asked Farah, if you're one of those writers who figured out very early that you had an affinity for word stories and you had it all planned out, you're going to be a writer, or was that something that developed for you later in life? And how did you find your way then?
Yeah, such a good question. I have always been writing. It's like one of those stupid children who wrote lots of journals and tried lots of horrible poetry. And I'm not telling you what the journals are, but it's like pages and pages of this happened in school today, or like I think I kept a journal for 7 years or something, and I was always trying fiction. But to pursue a path as a writer, and only that in Phuc Tran, is for maybe good reason or not good reason. Look, not considered like, yay, go for it. It's like, okay, no, do your business degree first, or your engineering, law, the really good fallback options. And then, so I got my degree in business, and my God, I was so bored. And I tried working in that, but it was soul crushing for me. And so there were many years of that. And then there were some years when I was like, okay, I'm actively not going to write. It was, I don't know why, it was just a decision with a capital D. But then I think really randomly, some friends of mine in Dubai, we formed like a writer's group, and I said, okay, I'll go for it. And my God, it felt so good, like a pressure valve. It was such a relief. And then things like some 7 years ago, I said, I'm gonna learn how to finish a short story. And it felt like, why did I not do this all these years? It felt good. So, yeah.
Well, this is a question for Phuc, and then we have another audience question. For Phuc is would you please, is the question, read your favorite sentence from Farah's book?
Wait, me?
Oh.
Yes.
Wait, why should I read it?
Wait, because you said okay, yeah, no, ask Farah to read it.
No, I want Farah to read it.
But you have to tell her what it is.
Yeah, of course. Guys, this sentence is just like, I'm serious. Like I may just steal it anyway. Oscar Wilde says, right? Talent borrows, genius steals. I will footnote it and I will attribute it to you. Could you go, please, Farah, would you please go to page 140? And then at the section break. I mean, you could read the whole paragraph. That whole paragraph is just bonkers, but yeah, I mean,
read the whole
it's not that long. Yeah, read the paragraph. It's like 45 seconds, guys. It's just gonna blow your socks off. It's so good.
Oh, which one? 140?
Yeah, page
like
1.
On the top of the page?
No. We had grown up.
Oh, okay. Okay, all right. I'll read that paragraph then. We had grown up on thin air, the oxygen sucked up by our father and mother's moods. We were curved and wiry and tense like antennae, picking up signals of impending storms from the way our father snapped his newspaper or how our mother shut the fridge door. Too sharp a sound meant that soon old wounds were going to be reopened with blade-like words. Sometimes I mouthed along, being my father and mother by turns, like an actor playing two roles. Other times I went to my brother and found him elaborately coloring in a map or a picture of the human heart or an eyeball or the circulation system.
Oh man, that sentence is so good. We had grown up on thin air. Oh man, that was great. I immediately passed that to my wife. I was like, read that. It's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, the blade sentence isn't that bad either. That one's pretty good. Michelle Ridu has a question. Rado, sorry, has a question. Who are some of your favorite authors, Farah, and who are you reading right now?
Yeah, so I love Grace Paley. I like how she's really spare with her words, was spare with her words, and but still packed so much atmosphere and story and character, And I like a lot of Alice Munro's works. She writes much longer than Grace Paley, but there's also this feeling of holding back somehow. And I did read a lot of Raymond Carver, and I did read a lot of Hemingway. And yes, I know it's like all sorts of opinions about that, but I read what I read. Currently, I'm reading, I read a really short novel recently. It's a translation by of Yu Miri's work, Tokyo Ueno Station. It's a really slim volume, and it's basically it's about a homeless ghost and in one of the parks in Tokyo. And I found it fascinating. It's got history in it, and it's got covers like a lot of decades. I read another translation, this book that's called a nonfiction novel by Benjamin Labatut, When We Cease to Understand the World. So I found that great. And I'm reading Virginia Woolf's The Waves, which I did not take on my trip, Taryn, because it was so intense. I was like, no, I can't read it on, when I'm disoriented. So I've never read anything like that before. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I haven't read Virginia Woolf either, so I need to get that on my list as well. But Farah, I was wondering, I've always wanted to know, so I feel like this is a good time to ask you, like a little bit about the evolution behind the story, The Effect of Heat on Poor People, because that is one, like I have a lot of favorites in this book, but that's one where the ending just completely surprised me. And you don't have to give it away necessarily, but like I guess maybe I could turn that into a more general question is like, do your endings surprise you, like, or in particular that one, like did that come out of the blue, like how the change in that dynamic of the relationship, or like just talk to me a little bit more about that story, because I think about it a lot.
Yeah, it's such a good question, Taryn, because I don't always know how they're going to end the stories, and that's from me trying to write really from behind the characters' eyeballs, like I'm their hands, or I'm their feet, or I'm their mouth. So I don't know what they'll do next so much as I discover stuff along with them. So, and I think it comes from the idea that we think we know what we'll feel maybe by the end of the hour or the day or a year or a life or a relationship. But sometimes we're really surprised by how the disconnect is between what we thought we would feel and what the reality is. So, and I think that's more true somehow to how we function as humans. So that, yeah, I didn't know how that story would end. I was surprised as well.
Can I jump in? So,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
No, go for it.
Do you like, would you say that that's true for most of your stories? Like, I read an interview with another writer who said that if she was saying that in her process, if she were writing and couldn't surprise herself in the writing process, that was sort of, that would doom her reader, that the act of writing needed to be like that she wasn't a mapper for her book, and that like she sort of had like a loose outline, but otherwise there were things, big things, plot things that happened for her in the writing process that were delightful for her, and that's when she would know that it would be a delight for her reader as well. So I'm curious, like very much just spinning off of Taryn's question about whether that was the surprise element is true for you for most of your stories, or like some of your stories, 60%.
Yeah, I would say most of my stories, and it's not coming from an intentional way of let me put a twist at the end. It's just somehow sometimes it really is maybe subverting expectations somehow of the character's own expectations. Like you thought you're going to, like you as in the person in the page was going to feel this way or behave this way, but not really. You suck a lot more than you thought you did. Or it's a little better than you thought it was. I think the person on the page is as surprised as possibly the reader could be. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like another story like that too, the first one where a mother loses a child and she expects that she would handle it in a much more like poised and stoic way, and she's just like so angry at the child that's died and keeps having all these like visions of all the ways in which he disappointed her at times. And that, I think that's another example of how in your work you do that. Your characters are always, it's not just the reader that are coming to understand the characters, but the characters are always, as the pages go on, coming to get a better understanding of themselves and are often quite surprised by their own behavior and feelings.
Yeah.
Which is so cool. Do any other questions from the audience? I'll just add that I would definitely shelf your book, not alphabetically, because that's not my jam, or by color, but just like with the books of my heart usually are the ones like yours that really sink deeply into a character and just really try to embody like what it is like to live within a certain head, a certain heart, when usually that feels things very deeply, but it also has a hard time living in the world sometimes. I love those kind of people in life and in stories. So trying to think, but that's where I would put your book, with like, some of my favorites, because they just really speak to kind of the depth and complexity and difficulty at times of the human experience, but that like it's also hard to let go of that experience, which is why we stay standing at the edges of like the rooftops of buildings, like your characters on the cover of your book, which I love. So
Yeah.
Phuc, do you have any closing thoughts for Farah? Those are kind of my closing thoughts. I thank you guys for joining us. I would highly recommend this book. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I loved it so much. So if you don't get this back, Taryn, sorry.
I think I know where to find you. I can look up your address.
I will shelve this right next to Raymond Carver, I think. That's where I would put it. But I think it's pretty good company. But also, I don't know. I'll think about it, because you also have Dewey Decimal or Library of Congress filing system. So
there you go.
It's a little controversial, or alphabetical, I guess, if you just want to be super basic. No judgments, Farah.
She does have a pretty nice bookshelf, which she's showing us right now, so we can't knock it too much, because that's like a really nice backspread.
It's messy and it's accidental. If my laptop doesn't allow me to blur my background, but if I could, I would.
Well, thank you so much, Farah and Phuc. This has been a great conversation, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.